Anxiety in Alcoholics Anonymous. Anxiety is one of the most silent yet destructive emotional struggles connected to alcoholism. For many people in Alcoholics Anonymous, anxiety did not begin after alcohol entered their lives. It existed long before the addiction fully developed. Deep inside, many alcoholics carried constant fear, emotional tension, insecurity, loneliness, overthinking, restlessness, panic, or an overwhelming feeling that they could never truly relax. Even during ordinary moments, their minds remained trapped in worry. Some feared rejection, others feared failure, abandonment, conflict, humiliation, or the uncertainty of life itself. Many simply felt uncomfortable inside their own skin. Before discovering alcohol, countless alcoholics already struggled emotionally with the pressure of existing. For some, anxiety came from traumatic childhood experiences, unstable homes, emotional neglect, bullying, or painful relationships. Others developed anxiety because they constantly felt different from the people around them. They felt emotionally disconnected, misunderstood, or unable to fit into society comfortably. Many learned to hide their fear behind fake confidence, humor, anger, or isolation. Outwardly, they appeared normal, but internally their minds were exhausted from constant emotional noise. When alcohol first appeared, it often felt like relief rather than danger. The anxious person who constantly overthought every situation suddenly felt calm. The shy individual who feared judgment became social and confident. The person filled with emotional tension finally experienced temporary peace. Alcohol seemed to remove fear, quiet insecurities, and create emotional freedom that had never existed before. For the first time, many felt able to escape the prison inside their minds. This emotional relief is one of the reasons alcoholism becomes so powerful and deceptive. Alcohol does not initially feel like destruction to the anxious person. It feels like survival. Many alcoholics do not begin drinking simply because they want pleasure. They begin drinking because they desperately want relief from emotional suffering. Alcohol becomes a temporary solution to internal chaos. The problem, however, is that the relief never lasts. Over time, the body and mind begin depending on alcohol to regulate emotions. The anxious individual slowly loses the ability to feel calm naturally without drinking. What once appeared to be medicine slowly becomes poison. As alcoholism progresses, anxiety becomes even worse than before. Relationships begin falling apart. Financial problems appear. Shame grows stronger. Physical health declines, sleep becomes unstable, trust disappears, emotional guilt increases. The alcoholic begins living in constant fear, fear of consequences, fear of being exposed, fear of losing people, fear of withdrawal, fear of loneliness, and fear of themselves. The same substance once used to escape anxiety eventually creates more anxiety than the person had in the beginning. This creates a terrifying emotional cycle. The alcoholic drinks to reduce fear and emotional discomfort, but the drinking itself produces even greater emotional instability. As life becomes more chaotic, anxiety intensifies, leading the person to drink even more for temporary relief. Slowly, alcohol stops being a choice and becomes emotional dependence. Many alcoholics eventually reach a point where they no longer drink to feel good. They drink simply to feel less bad. Inside Alcoholics Anonymous, recovering alcoholics often discover that anxiety remains one of the greatest challenges of sobriety. When alcohol is removed, the emotional numbness disappears. Suddenly, all the fear, insecurity, panic, shame, and emotional pain that had been buried for years rises back to the surface. The recovering alcoholic must now face emotions directly without escaping through alcohol. This stage can feel emotionally overwhelming. Many newcomers entering recovery describe feeling mentally restless, emotionally exposed, and spiritually exhausted. Their minds race constantly. They worry about the future, relationships, finances, relapse, health, and whether life will ever feel normal again. Some experience panic attacks. Others struggle with insomnia, emotional isolation, or intense fear about facing life sober. Everyday situations that once seemed manageable while drinking now feel terrifying without alcohol as an emotional shield. For many recovering alcoholics, sobriety feels like learning how to live emotionally for the first time. One of the hardest truths in recovery is realizing that alcohol never truly healed anxiety. It only delayed and numbed it temporarily. Beneath the addiction, the emotional pain remained alive the entire time. Recovery forces individuals to confront not only the physical addiction to alcohol, but also the emotional suffering that fueled it. This is why anxiety becomes such an important topic in Alcoholics Anonymous. Recovery is not simply about quitting alcohol, it is about learning how to survive fear, uncertainty, stress, and emotional discomfort without returning to self-destruction. The alcoholic must slowly develop new emotional tools for living: honesty, surrender, spirituality, connection, humility, patience, and acceptance. This transformation does not happen overnight. The anxious alcoholic often enters recovery wanting immediate peace, but emotional healing takes time. Years of fear, emotional suppression, and mental chaos cannot disappear instantly. Many recovering alcoholics must learn how to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of escaping them. They begin discovering that courage is not the absence of anxiety, but the willingness to continue moving forward despite fear. Over time, recovery teaches something powerful. Anxiety does not have to control a person's life forever. Through meetings, shared experiences, spiritual growth, emotional honesty, and support from others, many alcoholics slowly begin rebuilding inner stability. The mind becomes clearer, emotional reactions become healthier, fear loses some of its control. The person who once depended on alcohol to survive emotionally begins learning how to live with strength and self-awareness. Perhaps the greatest miracle in recovery is not that anxiety completely disappears. The miracle is that the alcoholic no longer has to run from it through destruction. Inside Alcoholics Anonymous, countless people discover that even after years of fear, emotional instability, and addiction, peace is still possible. Not perfect peace, not a life without struggle, but a life where fear no longer controls every decision. And for many recovering alcoholics, that discovery becomes the true beginning of freedom. Anxiety is one of the most common and painful emotional struggles experienced by people suffering from alcoholism. For many alcoholics, anxiety existed long before the drinking became uncontrollable. It lived quietly inside the mind as fear, nervousness, insecurity, overthinking, emotional tension, loneliness, panic, or an overwhelming sense that something was always wrong. Some people felt anxious in social situations. Others feared rejection, failure, abandonment, or simply facing life itself. Many alcoholics describe feeling emotionally uncomfortable even when nothing dangerous was happening around them. Before alcohol entered their lives, many struggled to feel calm inside their own minds. When alcohol was first discovered, it often felt like relief. The anxious person who constantly overthought everything suddenly felt relaxed. The individual who feared judgment became more confident. The person trapped in emotional tension finally felt temporary peace. Alcohol seemed to silence fear, quiet racing thoughts, and remove emotional discomfort for a few hours. For many alcoholics, this moment becomes emotionally dangerous because alcohol does not simply feel pleasurable, it feels like medicine. The problem is that alcohol only creates temporary escape. While it may numb anxiety for a short period, it slowly increases emotional instability over time. The body and mind begin depending on alcohol to feel normal. Eventually, the alcoholic no longer drinks for fun or celebration. They drink to avoid emotional collapse. This is where the cycle of alcoholism and anxiety becomes destructive. The alcoholic drinks to reduce fear and emotional pressure, but the drinking itself creates more anxiety. Relationships become unstable, financial problems appear, physical health declines, shame grows stronger, sleep becomes worse, the mind becomes emotionally exhausted. As consequences increase, anxiety becomes even more intense, leading the person to drink again for relief. The cycle repeats endlessly. Inside Alcoholics Anonymous, many recovering alcoholics discover that anxiety was never truly removed by alcohol. It was only delayed. Once sobriety begins, the emotional numbness disappears, and anxiety often returns with tremendous force. This stage can feel terrifying because the alcoholic no longer has their usual escape mechanism. Suddenly, emotions feel overwhelming. The recovering alcoholic may experience racing thoughts, fear about the future, panic about relationships, guilt from the past, financial stress, loneliness, or fear of relapse. Many become emotionally restless. Some cannot sleep properly. Others feel uncomfortable in silence because their minds never stop moving. One of the most difficult parts of recovery is learning how to sit with emotions without escaping through alcohol. For years, many alcoholics train themselves to avoid emotional discomfort. Every stressful situation triggered the desire to drink. Every painful memory created emotional panic. Every moment of fear became an excuse to escape reality. Sobriety forces the alcoholic to develop new emotional tools for survival. This process is not easy. Anxiety in recovery often becomes strongest during moments of uncertainty. The alcoholic may fear whether they can remain sober, rebuild relationships, repair financial damage, or create a meaningful life again. Some become overwhelmed by shame about their past. Others fear they are emotionally broken forever. The mind constantly asks dangerous questions. What if I fail? What if nobody forgives me? What if sobriety never gets easier? What if I cannot handle life without alcohol? These fears can become mentally exhausting. In many cases, alcoholics also struggle with perfectionism and control. They desperately want certainty in life, but recovery teaches that certainty does not exist. Life remains unpredictable. Pain still happens. Loss still happens. Fear still exists. One of the greatest spiritual lessons in Alcoholics Anonymous is learning how to live without trying to control everything. This is where surrender becomes powerful. Many newcomers misunderstand surrender because they associate it with weakness. In reality, surrender means accepting that they can no longer control alcohol, other people, or every situation in life. Anxiety often grows from the obsession with controlling outcomes. The alcoholic constantly worries about the future, trying to predict every possible disaster before it happens. But recovery teaches people to live one day at a time. This principle may sound simple, but for anxious alcoholics, it becomes life-changing. Instead of carrying the weight of the entire future, they learn to focus only on staying sober today. Tomorrow becomes less terrifying when life is approached moment by moment. Meetings also play a major role in reducing anxiety. Many alcoholics spend years feeling isolated and misunderstood. They believe nobody could possibly understand the chaos inside their minds. But inside meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, they hear people describe the exact same fears, panic, insecurities, and emotional struggles they secretly carried for years. This creates something powerful: identification. The anxious alcoholic realizes they are not alone. For perhaps the first time in their life, they feel emotionally understood without judgment. They discover that fear, overthinking, shame, and emotional instability are common parts of alcoholism. This shared experience reduces isolation, which is one of the greatest emotional fuels for anxiety. Spirituality also becomes important in managing anxiety during recovery. Many members learn that constant fear comes from trying to carry life entirely on their own shoulders. Through prayer, meditation, reflection, or connection with a higher power, recovering alcoholics begin developing trust instead of constant panic. This spiritual growth does not remove all anxiety overnight. Instead, it slowly changes the relationship people have with fear. The alcoholic begins understanding that emotions do not need to control every decision. Anxiety may still appear, but it no longer has to dictate behavior. Recovery teaches emotional endurance, the ability to feel fear without escaping through self-destruction. Another difficult reality is that many alcoholics experience anxiety because they spent years emotionally disconnected from themselves. During active addiction, feelings were constantly numbed. In sobriety, emotions return fully. Happiness feels stronger, but so does sadness, fear, grief, loneliness, and vulnerability. At first, this emotional intensity can feel unbearable. Some recovering alcoholics describe early sobriety as learning how to live again emotionally. Ordinary situations suddenly feel overwhelming. Conversations become uncomfortable. Silence becomes loud. Stress feels magnified. But with time, the mind slowly heals. The brain and nervous system begin recovering from years of alcohol abuse. Sleep improves, thinking becomes clearer, emotional reactions become more stable. The person slowly learns healthy coping mechanisms such as honesty, communication, prayer, exercise, service, meditation, and connection with others. This healing process requires patience. This transformation does not happen perfectly. Some days remain difficult. Anxiety may still appear during stress, grief, uncertainty, or emotional exhaustion. But recovery teaches that discomfort is temporary, while self-destruction creates permanent consequences. The alcoholic slowly learns that peace is not the absence of fear. Peace is the ability to continue living without running from fear. Perhaps the most beautiful lesson inside Alcoholics Anonymous is that anxious people do not have to fight alone anymore. Recovery creates connection, understanding, honesty, and hope. The alcoholic, who once felt trapped inside a mind filled with fear, slowly discovers a new way to live. Not a perfect life, not a fearless life, but a life no longer controlled by alcohol or anxiety. And for many recovering alcoholics, that freedom becomes one of the greatest miracles of all.